The galaxy had been quiet for years, but silence was dangerous when empires watched each other with hidden knives. On the edge of the Great Orion Passage, patrol ships vanished without a trace. No signal, no wreckage, only silence. The first whispers began in the halls of the Galactic Court, whispers that pointed at Earth. Humanity, they said, was expanding too fast, too fiercely, and had become a threat. The decision was made quickly. War was declared against humans before a single human voice could answer. The alien queen of the Luthri did not want this war. Her people were not warriors but rulers of old blood, and their courts glittered with jewels and ceremony rather than firepower. Yet she was bound to the council's vote. When the drums of war beat across the stars, the queen's palace gates shook under the echo of speeches calling for victory. Her daughter, a small girl with skin the shade of sapphire dawn, clung to her robes wide-eyed. That very night, the girl vanished without a trace, stolen from the palace gardens under a sky heavy with war banners. Rumors spread like fire. Some said the humans took her. Some said rival nobles plotted to weaken the queen. The queen's grief hardened into fury, and the banners of her fleet turned black. She declared that her people would burn every human ship until her child was returned. Every planet heard her cry, and armies moved at her command. The war she once feared became her shield, her reason, and her vengeance. Every battle was fought with her daughter's name painted across the hulls of her warships. But in the chaos, truth wandered far from power. On a ruined mining colony at the edge of the war front, a lone human soldier stumbled across a small figure hiding in the wreckage. Her face was streaked with tears, her voice weak, her blue hands trembling as she whispered for her mother. The soldier could have walked away. He could have left her to the war, to vanish like the others. But he did not. He lifted her into his arms, and with that choice, he carried not only the child but the weight of two species' fate. The journey back was not easy. Every checkpoint was guarded by enemies. Every signal carried risk. The soldier moved through shadows, stealing rations, hiding in cargo holds, shielding the girl with his own body. She grew weaker, whispering a language he barely understood. Her small hand clutched his sleeve as though he was the last safe place in the galaxy. He told her stories of Earth, of oceans and forests, of stars seen from mountains instead of warships. The girl listened, her eyes glowing softly, and for the first time since she was taken, she smiled. Meanwhile, the queen raged in her palace. She crushed reports of diplomacy. She silenced those who begged for truce. She watched fleets burn in her name, and yet still felt no victory. Every night she stood on her balcony, searching the stars, whispering to the void for her daughter to answer. The war grew larger than she had ever wanted, yet her heart remained empty. Power had no meaning when her child's laughter was gone. In the council chambers, voices began to doubt. Why had no proof been shown that humans had taken the princess? Why had no ransom been demanded? A few dared to whisper that the war itself was built on shadows, that someone else had stolen the child to light the fires between Earth and the Luthri. But the queen's fury silenced all questions. None dared to confront her grief, for her grief had become her crown. On the other side of the stars, the human soldier stood on the deck of a stolen freighter. The girl pressed her forehead against the window, pointing at the shining palace world ahead. Her voice trembled, both in fear and hope. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm home." And with those words, the soldier knew the war was about to change forever. The stolen freighter drifted through empty space, its engines barely alive. Inside, the human soldier kept his eyes on the scanner, searching for patrols. The alien girl sat close beside him, her blue skin glowing faintly in the dim light. She was weak, but her spirit remained unbroken. Each time the ship shook, she clutched his arm, whispering that her mother would come for her. He did not know if the queen would welcome him or kill him, but he knew he could not abandon her now. They reached the outer defense ring of the Luthri homeworld. Towers of light stretched across the horizon, and warships filled the orbit like blades pointed outward. The soldier slowed the freighter and adjusted the signal. If they entered without permission, the ship would be torn apart by plasma fire. He activated the emergency beacon and prayed the Luthri would not fire first. The girl leaned forward, her voice trembling but clear. She said her name and rank into the comms, declaring herself as the missing princess. For the first time since the war began, the guns hesitated. The control tower demanded proof. The soldier stepped into the camera feed, holding the princess by his side. His uniform was burned, his face scarred, and yet his posture stood tall. He did not speak of himself. He only told them it had found her in ruins and swore he had risked everything to bring her back. The officers on the other side watched him with suspicion, their voices sharp, their hands ready to strike the kill order. But when the girl pressed her hand to the glass and whispered her mother's name, silence filled the channel. The queen was summoned to the command chamber. She swept in with her crown blazing and her robes heavy with gold. Her face was carved from grief and fire, and when she saw the screen, her breath caught. There was her daughter, alive, clinging to the arm of a human. Her eyes widened, and her voice shook the hall as she demanded that the ship be escorted safely. No one dared argue. No one dared fire. The warships that once roared with fury now turned to shield the tiny freighter as it descended toward the palace world. When the freighter landed, the queen stood on the landing platform with her guards arrayed behind her. She had prepared herself for disappointment, for a trick, for an illusion. But when the ramp lowered and her daughter stepped out, running into her arms, the queen's heart broke open. She wept openly, clutching the girl against her chest, her crown slipping as tears stained her face. The people around her dropped to their knees, for they had never seen their ruler cry. The human soldier stood at the bottom of the ramp, silent, unsure if he would live another hour. The queen lifted her head and saw him. Her guards raised their weapons instantly, surrounding him in a ring of steel. He did not resist. He only raised his hands, his eyes calm, his breathing steady. He had fulfilled his promise. Whether he lived or died no longer mattered. The girl twisted in her mother's arms, shouting, begging her not to hurt him. She told the queen how he had saved her, how he had fed her, protected her, and carried her through fire when no one else had come. The queen froze as her daughter's words struck deep. For a moment, the palace platform was silent except for the wind. Then the queen spoke. Her voice was sharp, but not with anger. She ordered the guards to lower their weapons. Slowly, unwillingly, they obeyed. The soldier dropped his arms, though his eyes never left hers. He did not plead. He did not beg. He simply stood as a man who had carried the weight of two worlds. The queen studied him, her mind torn between vengeance and gratitude. For the first time, doubt entered her heart about the war she had sworn to fight. The queen turned back to her daughter, stroking her hair as she whispered softly. The girl pointed back to the soldier and declared once more that he was her rescuer. The crowd began to murmur. Rumors would spread by nightfall that the human enemy had brought back the royal heir. Already, the war drums that had pounded so loudly seemed to falter. Already, the banners of fire began to shake in the winds of doubt. The queen's tears still stained her cheeks as she looked at the human soldier and asked a question that could change the galaxy forever. The question left hanging in the air froze every heart on the platform. The queen had never spoken to a human before, and now she asked one with tears still wet on her cheeks. Her guards waited for her command, unsure if they would strike or stand down. The soldier bowed his head slightly, his voice steady but respectful. He told her he wanted nothing, only to see the girl safe in her mother's arms. His words carried no pride, no plea, only the truth of a man who had chosen to save instead of destroy. The queen narrowed her eyes as if searching his soul. She had heard humans described as monsters, greedy and ruthless, killers who thrived on chaos. Yet here stood one who had risked his life to return what even her armies could not. She looked at her daughter, who nodded fiercely, clinging to her and repeating that he was her rescuer. The queen felt the weight of the war pressing against her chest, and for the first time she wondered if all the fire she had unleashed had been aimed at the wrong enemy. Inside the palace halls, news of the girl's return spread like a storm. Courtiers whispered in the corridors. Servants knelt in shock, and nobles who had demanded vengeance now avoided the queen's eyes. The sight of the blue-skinned child holding her mother's hand seemed more powerful than all the proclamations of war. But behind the joy, questions grew sharper. If not the humans, Then who had taken her? What power had stolen a princess from her own gardens? And why? The queen had no answer, and that silence burned deeper than her rage. The soldier was kept under heavy guard, yet he was not chained. He was given a chamber in the palace, watched day and night, but treated with a strange respect. He did not sleep easily. He had lived too long in the ruins of war, and the weight of survival clung to him. At night, he listened to the alien songs drifting to the palace walls. Songs of grief and longing. He thought of Earth, far away, where no one knew if he lived. He thought of the battles he had fought, and wondered if peace was only a story told to children. The queen spent hours alone with her daughter, listening to every word she spoke of the journey. The girl described a ruined colony, the hunger, the fear, and the man who carried her through it all. She spoke of how he shared his food, shielded her from cold winds, and told stories of oceans and forests. The queen's heart broke with each detail, for her child had suffered in silence while she had painted the stars with war. She began to see the soldier not as an enemy, but as a mirror of a choice she had never made. Yet not all shared her doubt. In the council chamber, lord and generals shouted that the war could not stop. They demanded blood, claiming the soldier was a spy, that the girl's words were tricks planted in her mind. They insisted that humanity remained the enemy, and that mercy would destroy the strength of their empire. The queen listened as they thundered, but her gaze never left her daughter. For every word they spoke, she remembered the soft whisper of her child saying, "Mom, I'm home." That whisper cut deeper than their shouts. The soldier was summoned to the chamber. He walked with soldiers on both sides, his step slow but firm. He did not wear armor, only the torn uniform that marked him as human. The nobles sneered, some spat, but he did not answer them. He stood before the queen, silent, waiting. She asked him why he saved her daughter when war had made them enemies. His answer was simple: because she was a child, and no child should be left to die. His words echoed across the chamber, silencing even the loudest voice. The queen rose from her throne, her daughter still by her side. She looked at the soldier with eyes that no longer burned with hatred, but with the weight of choices yet to be made. She told the council that the war had begun because of a lie, and that lies had stolen her child. She would not let lies steal her empire as well. Some gasped, some protested, but her voice cut through them all. For the first time since the war began, hope entered the halls of the palace like a blade of light through stone. The queen's words in the council chamber spread beyond the walls like fire. Nobles whispered in corners, generals clenched their fists, and commoners in the streets felt the shift of power as if the air itself had changed. The war that consumed entire star systems now trembled on the edge of collapse. Yet, not everyone welcomed the thought of peace. War fed ambition, and ambition fed the powerful. In shadows, whispers rose of betrayal, of weakness, of a queen blinded by her grief and swayed by a single human soldier. The princess remained close to her rescuer, refusing to leave his side whenever the palace allowed her to visit. She told him stories of her people, of songs sung beneath glowing moons, of gardens filled with silver trees. In return, he told her of Earth, of rain on rooftops, of forests alive with birds, of oceans so wide they swallowed the horizon. She listened with wonder, her laughter returning like light, breaking through storm clouds. To him, it felt like carrying her home had given him a purpose greater than any uniform or command ever had. But the queen knew danger lingered. She summoned her most trusted advisors in private, away from the ears of the council. She spoke of her doubts, of the missing answers. If the humans had not stolen her daughter, who had? If no ransom had been demanded, what was the true purpose? Her advisors shifted uncomfortably, some warning her that seeking truth could unravel everything. Yet she could not ignore the gnawing voice inside her heart. She had seen the honesty in the soldier's eyes and heard it in her daughter's voice. Lies had taken root somewhere deeper than she had feared. The soldier himself struggled to understand his place. He was both honored guest and caged prisoner, watched carefully wherever he went. He did not ask for release, nor did he beg for a return to Earth. Instead, he trained in the palace courtyards, keeping his body sharp, his mind focused. Palace guards watched his movements with suspicion, whispering that he was too calm, too ready, as if hiding secrets. Yet when the princess ran to him and laughed in his arms, even hardened soldiers felt their doubts tremble. It was hard to call enemy the man who brought laughter back to their air. Then came the first attempt on his life. A blade slipped into his chamber during the night, wielded by a shadow in servant's clothes. He fought barehanded, disarming the attacker before the guards arrived. When unmasked, the assassin was revealed not as a human agent, but as one of the Queen's own court faction. Shock spread quickly, and though the Queen silenced the news, her heart sank. The enemy was not only outside, but also within. Someone among her own had plotted to keep her daughter gone, to keep the war burning. The soldier had saved the child once again, this time from within the palace itself. The Queen began to watch her council with colder eyes. Each voice of war now sounded like poison to her. She wondered which among them had ordered her child's abduction, which hands had guided the lies that set her empire against humanity. Yet she could not strike openly, for one wrong move could splinter her people. The soldier became a strange anchor in this storm, a reminder that truth might still be stronger than deceit. When she saw him standing quietly near her daughter, she felt a steadiness she had not known since the day her child was stolen. The princess herself grew braver each day. She told her mother directly that the war must end, that the humans were not the monsters she had been told of. Her young voice carried weight far beyond her years, and even the harshest lords hesitated before silencing her. She stood by the soldier with unshakable loyalty, her hand in his, her eyes filled with trust. The Queen knew the sight of them together would be remembered by history. A child's faith, an enemy's mercy, and a mother's choice all colliding in a single fragile moment. At last, the Queen gathered her strength and spoke to her people. In the grand square of the capital, beneath towers draped with banners, she appeared with her daughter in her arms and the human soldiers standing behind them. She declared the princess safe, declared that truth had been twisted, declared that the war must end. Her words rolled across the city like thunder, shaking every heart. Some cheered, some wept, and some clenched their fists in fury. But none could deny what they saw. The lost child had returned, and her rescuer was not a Lutheri, but a human. The Queen's speech echoed across the galaxy. Transmission screens on distant outposts carried her words, and soldiers in the field lowered their weapons to listen. To some, her voice was betrayal, but to many, it was salvation. The war had drained treasuries, burned homes, and turned children into orphans. The promise of peace stirred something long buried in their hearts. Yet even as hope spread, shadows gathered. Those who profited from war, those who had risen in power through blood, would not let peace steal their throne so easily. The soldier felt the weight of eyes on him, wherever he went. Some bowed their heads in silent gratitude. Others spat as he passed. He bore it all quietly, his focus fixed only on the princess he had sworn to protect. At times he stood on the palace balconies, staring at the alien skies, wondering if his own people would see him as traitor or hero. The thought did not matter to him anymore. He had chosen his path when he lifted the girl from the ruins. That choice defined him more than any flag or army ever could. The princess clung to his side, her laughter filling the palace halls once again. She carried herself with new courage, no longer a victim but a voice of truth. She spoke in public assemblies, telling her people what she had seen, of how a human soldier had been her shield in the darkest nights. Her words were simple, but they cut deeper than any weapon. The young listened. The mothers listened. Even hardened warriors felt their anger tremble when a child reminded them that enemies could also be protectors. In the council chambers, the storm raged hotter. Some demanded the soldier's execution, claiming that sparing him weakened their pride. Others argued for trial, for delay, for time to regain control. But the Queen stood firm, her daughter's hand clasped in hers. She declared that the soldier's life was under her protection, that his actions had spoken louder than the falsehoods of their enemies. Her voice struck like a hammer, and though resistance burned in many eyes, none dared openly defy her. Yet she knew they would not remain silent forever. That night, another attempt was made. A squad of assassins struck the palace walls, cloaked in shadows, their blades coated with poison. But the soldier was ready. He fought them in silence, his body moving with the practiced rhythm of survival. By dawn, 3 lay captured and 1 dead at his feet. When unmasked, their faces revealed not enemies from Earth, but high-born nobles of the Queen's own court. Rage lit the Queen's heart as she realized the truth more clearly. The war had not been born from human hands, but from treachery inside her own throne. The revelation shook her. In the quiet of her chambers, she stared into the mirror, her crown heavy upon her head. She had unleashed fire upon an entire species for the loss of her daughter, and yet the true enemy had dined at her own tables. The soldier's eyes haunted her, for he had spoken no lies, asked no reward, sought no power. He had only returned what was never his to keep. For the first time in her reign, the Queen felt shame. It cut deeper than grief, and it demanded justice. She gathered her council once more, her face calm but her voice cold as steel. She laid the captured assassins before them, their confessions echoing through the chamber. Gasps and denials filled the air, but truth could no longer be silenced. The Queen declared them traitors, stripped their titles, and sentenced them to exile beyond the stars. Many nobles trembled, for secrets they thought buried now threatened to surface. The soldier stood at the chamber's edge, watching the empire fracture under the weight of its own lies. When the sentence was carried out, the people cheered in the streets. They saw justice not only for the Queen's daughter, but for themselves. The soldier's image spread across the empire, a symbol of unexpected honor. In taverns, children spoke his name, and mothers blessed him in whispered prayers. Yet beyond the cheers, the Queen saw the danger. Power never fades quietly, and those stripped of it would not forgive. War had ended at her command, but another kind of war was already beginning. One fought not in the stars, but in the shadows of her own throne. The Black Fleet struck with ruthless precision. Their cannons cut through the defense lines, and panic spread across the capital as fire lit the skies. The Queen stood tall in the command chamber, her daughter by her side, and the soldiers standing like a wall of steel near the throne. Her generals shouted warnings, but she silenced them with a single raised hand. Her voice was steady as she ordered her loyal fleet to strike back. This was no war of survival between species. This was justice against traitors who had stolen everything from her. The soldier quickly took charge of ground defense. He organized the palace guards into formations, using tactics the Lutheri had never seen. Barricades were reinforced, choke points established, and corridors sealed. Soldiers obeyed him without hesitation, for in the chaos his commands carried clarity and strength. The Queen watched him with cautious admiration. She saw a man who did not fight for conquest or glory, but for duty. When her daughter clung to his side, she felt both fear and relief, for she knew he would never let harm touch her child while breath remained in his body. The mercenary fleet broke through the outer ring and began deploying troops across the city. Streets once filled with merchants and children now shook with marching soldiers. Fire spread and cries filled the air. The Queen's loyalists clashed with the invaders at every corner. Blood stained the shining stones of the capital. The soldier led a detachment into the heart of the fight, his rifle blazing, his movement sharp and relentless. To those who fought beside him, he seemed less a man and more a storm-given flesh. His presence turned despair into courage. The princess, though still young, refused to hide. She stood in the palace square, speaking to the frightened crowds, telling them not to give in to fear. Her voice carried over the sound of explosions, reminding them that their queen still fought for them. The people rallied, raising their own weapons, defending their homes with newfound resolve. The Queen saw her daughter's courage and knew she could no longer shield her from the weight of leadership. Her child had become a symbol brighter than any crown. Even in war, hope burned in her voice. Inside the command chamber, the Queen confronted captured traitors who had been seized by loyal guards. She demanded names, demanded truth, demanded the reasons for their betrayal. Their answers revealed the depth of the plot. The lords who had lost power in exile had promised riches and dominion to mercenaries, selling out their own people for the chance to reclaim the throne. The Queen's fury was unmatched. She swore before the chamber that those who sold her daughter's life for ambition would pay not only with exile, but with destruction. The traitors trembled under her gaze. The soldier returned bloodied but unbroken from the front lines. His uniform was torn, his arm cut, but his eyes burned with determination. He reported that the people themselves had risen, fighting beside the loyal soldiers. He spoke of streets where farmers stood with spears, where children carried water to the wounded, where mothers dragged barricades into place. He said that the city itself was alive with resistance. The queen listened and felt her heart swell. For the first time in years, her empire did not fight from fear, but from unity. The Black Fleet began to falter under the combined might of loyal forces and civilian resistance. One by one, mercenary ships fell from the sky in burning trails. Yet the battle was not over. The traitors still commanded the central flagship that loomed above the city, its weapons capable of destroying the palace itself. The queen turned to the soldier, asking if he could lead a strike. He nodded without hesitation. He would go, not because he sought glory, but because he could not stand by while a child's home was under threat. As the strike team prepared, the princess grabbed his hand, her eyes wide with fear. She begged him to come back, her voice trembling yet strong. He knelt to meet her gaze and promised he would return. She pressed a small pendant into his hand, a jewel she had worn since birth, telling him it would protect him. The queen watched this exchange, her heart torn. She had once seen him only as an enemy, but now she realized he had become part of their lives in ways she could never have imagined. She whispered a silent prayer as he left. The strike team launched from the palace hangar, their ship streaking toward the enemy flagship. At the front flew the soldiers' vessel, small and fast, carrying only a handful of fighters. The queen watched from her command balcony, her daughter's hand gripping hers tightly. The sky burned with the fury of war, yet her eyes followed only one ship. She whispered that if fate demanded sacrifice, let it not be the man who would save her child. But the soldier was already beyond her reach, diving into the storm with steady hands. The enemy flagship loomed like a beast of steel, its cannon spitting fire across the capital. The soldier weaved through the chaos, his team taking heavy losses. Yet he pressed on, guiding his ship into the heart of danger. Enemy fighters swarmed, but his skill carved a path. He thought of the girl's voice calling him back, of her pendant resting against his chest. He thought of her mother's tear-stained face, once filled with hatred, now filled with trust. He would not let that trust be broken. He would not let the child's home be destroyed. The strike team breached the flagship's defenses, docking at a service port. The soldier led the charge inside, rifle in hand, his movements sharp and relentless. The corridors echoed with gunfire, mercenaries falling before the storm. His men pushed forward, step by step, until they reached the court chamber where the traitor lords waited. The air was thick with smoke and rage. The soldier raised his weapon, not for vengeance, but for duty. The lords screamed of power, of thrones, of destiny, but their voices faltered when he advanced without fear. In the throne-like command seat sat the leader of the traitors, his armor blackened with silver sigils. He sneered at the soldier, mocking the idea that a single human could decide the fate of an empire. He boasted that he had stolen the princess, that he had planned the war, that he had fed lies to both sides so blood would never stop flowing. The words burned in the soldier's chest, but his hands did not shake. He fired once, and the leader fell. The room fell silent, and the chains of deception shattered at last. The flagship shook as its systems failed. Explosions tore through the decks and alarms wailed. The soldier ordered his men to evacuate, but he stayed behind to plant charges on the main reactor. Time was short, but he moved with precision, setting the charges before racing for the exit. Flames roared around him as he leapt into the escape craft. Behind him, the flagship erupted in a burst of fire that lit the skies above the capital. From the palace balcony, the queen and her daughter saw the fireball and prayed for his return. The escape craft broke through the flames, battered but intact. It descended into the palace courtyard, and the hatch opened. The soldier emerged, burned, bloodied, but alive. The princess ran to him, tears streaming down her cheeks, and threw her arms around him. He staggered but smiled faintly, placing the pendant back into her hands. The queen approached slowly, her crown gleaming in the firelight. She looked at him not as enemy, not even as outsider, but as the man who had given her back both daughter and empire. Before the gathered crowd, the queen raised her voice. She declared the war finished, declared the traitors destroyed, declared that peace with humanity would stand. Her words were carried across the stars, sealing the end of bloodshed. The people roared in triumph, not only for their queen, but for the soldier who stood beside her. Songs began to rise, songs of the princess returned, songs of the human who defied death, songs of a future where two peoples might walk together instead of apart. That night, in the quiet of the palace, the queen sat with her daughter and the soldier. She admitted that she had once hated his kind, that she had once sworn vengeance against every human. But now she understood. He had proven with action what no words could. Her daughter leaned against him, safe, smiling, alive. The queen's eyes softened, and she spoke the words that changed everything. "You are not enemy. You are family." And with those words, peace was no longer a dream, but a truth born from sacrifice and love.